the bike is torn down once again, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody at this point, but I have a good reason for it. So as you can see by the title of the video, we're making some pretty big changes, and I'll kind of explain why. But first, I'm going to show a few clips of me trying to get the bike tuned. After the last video, I got it fired up. It's running pretty well. And I was trying to dial it in, but we'll talk more about that in a minute.
So here's a quick slow-mo video of the AFR gauge when I'm hitting the throttle. And as you can see, as soon as I open the throttle, the number just spikes and goes up to 22.4, which is dead lean, and then only drops back down after I shut the throttle. So ideally, when we're opening the throttle quickly like that, we want to see the fuel or the AFR gauge drop to about 11, and obviously we're way off from that.
So you can see from those clips, I was able to get it dialed in fairly well. I had to do some funky things to get the bike to run the way I wanted, but I still wasn't able to get rid of that lean condition. So let me explain kind of what is going on. So when I'm hitting the throttle fairly quickly, but even just rolling into it, I'm getting the engine's going lean, because when you open the throttle or open the carburetor and the throttle blade opens, the air rushes in, and the air, theoretically, the air and fuel would rush in at the same time and get to the engine at the same time, but it doesn't. The air has a lower molecular weight than the fuel, so inherently the fuel is going to take a little bit longer to get to the engine. What happens is the engine goes lean for a second, and then once the fuel catches up, it kind of evens out. This is common in engines that aren't even supercharged or turbocharged. You'll have something called an accelerator pump, or in a fuel injection system, I think they call it accelerator enrichment. Essentially, an accelerator pump will add extra fuel and inject it, kind of squirt it straight into the intake to try to mitigate the engine going lean when you first snap it open. So the carburetor I have has an accelerator pump, but with the geometry of the intake and having to go through the blower, I know guys have gotten it to work because people run draw through setups all the time, but I think with my geometry and how long the intake tract is, I just can't get it to work. So, and the last thing I want to do is have this thing go lean and me put a hole in a piston or what have you. It can go bad pretty quick. So I had thought about running a secondary accelerator pump that would inject straight into the intake, and I was looking around online and I couldn't find anything you could just buy off the shelf as a kind of standalone accelerator pump. So I designed a couple things that I think would work, but by the time I did, got everything machined and working, the time and effort that goes into it is pretty extensive. So really, I just decided, screw that. I'm just going to make this thing fuel injected. This is going to be completely from scratch. I'm actually really excited to do it. And I think this is the perfect time to do it since I'm in the Midwest, it's getting cold. I'm not going to be able to ride the bike for several months anyways. So what a better time than now to make some drastic changes. So In this video, we're just going to get started. Now, this is going to be a multi-part, I don't know, you can call it a series, I guess. This is going to be multiple videos of me trying to get this converted to fuel injection. So we are going to just dive right into this. I've done a lot of research over the last few days on kind of what I need to get started, and there's a lot. But I've started gathering parts. So the first thing we're going to dive into is going to be the fuel rail and the injector bungs. So what I have here is just a raw piece of fuel rail. So you can get these in multiple sizes. This is for dash 6 AN fittings. You can do dash 8, dash 10, but dash 6 is going to be more than enough for this bike. So I also picked up injectors. My buddy actually had these. These are just stock Chevy 5.3 injectors. They're 25 pound per hour. If you're doing this yourself, it's pretty easy to figure out what size injector you need. There's injector calculators online that you just input your information, like power figure or projected power figure, whether it's supercharged, turbocharged, or naturally aspirated. There's a few things like what type of fuel you're running, and once you plug in all that, it'll tell you what size injector you need and at what % duty cycle it will run. So that's what I did, and it turned out I need about 25 pound per hour, which worked out perfectly because these stock 5.3 injectors are everywhere. So got a couple of those, my fuel rail and my plenum itself, and I think we're just gonna get started. So the first thing I need to do is get this cut down to the length I need. My injector spacing is gonna be 4.5 inches apart, so I told myself just cut this in half into 2 6-inch pieces, and that should be more than enough. And it gives me, if I mess up once, I have another piece that I can try on. So So I have the mark for each one of my injectors. So I'm going to just center punch that, and then we'll get it over to the drill press. All right, I finished up drilling out the injector ports. The drill bit was chattering pretty bad. My drill press bearings are pretty much cooked, so I think it'll work all right. But our injectors fit pretty nicely. So next thing I got to do is just tap the ends of the fuel rail for these dash 6 to ORB fittings. So I finished up the fuel rail and got our AN fittings mounted. Now I need to move on to doing the injector bungs. So for the injector bungs, we'll have one in each intake runner, and I'm going to have them set at about 45 degrees. They say, from the research I've done, at least 45 degrees is recommended, if not more. I have a little bit of space constraints, so we're just going to aim for 45 degrees. So I already have my injector bung stock, so I just need to cut or cope that to my intake runner. And since I don't have a tube notcher, I go onto a site, and I'll link it in the description, where you can input the pipe size that you're cutting, what tube you're trying to connect it to, the wall thickness, and whatever angle you want between those, and it'll spit out the pattern. So you just cut this out, wrap it around your tube, trace the pattern onto the tube, and just cut, and it's usually pretty accurate. I've already done one of the bungs using this method, and it turns out pretty good. It's pretty accurate when you mount it on the pipe. I have some of the stock I use for those intake runners, and it's not too bad. So I'm going to get this cut out, put it on the tube itself, and we'll get it cut.
So we're jumping ahead a little bit here. I've already tacked one injector bung in place, and before I did that, I ported out the hole for the injector bung, but I just wanted to show you real quick how I went about doing it. So all I did was I held the injector bung in place where I needed it and used a little bit of spray paint to spray down inside the bung, and it left me with a pattern of where I needed to drill and port out the hole. So my only advice here is just to port out the hole about 90% of the way, and then finish up the last 10% after you've welded on the bung, and just finish up the last 10% with the correct size drill bit. It's what I ended up doing on this project, and it worked out pretty well. So as far as positioning the injector bungs onto the plenum, honestly, I ended up just eyeballing it the best I could. I put the assembly together, set it on the plenum, and marked with Sharpie where it should go. I placed the level on it just to make sure it's as level as I could get it, and I just welded it out. Now, welding this out was extremely difficult, at least for me. I'm not a fabricator by any means. This is just a hobby of mine, but it was hard for me to get the torch between that steep angle of the injector bung and the plenum body. So I ended up dumping a little bit too much heat into one side of the bung and kind of burning down the tip of the bung a little bit, as you can see here. But I'm not too worried about it because the O-ring of the injector will sit way below that, so we shouldn't have any problem sealing. But overall, I think it turned out pretty good.
All right, we just finished up welding the intake plenum, and I put it on the bike to make sure everything's clearing and looks okay, and I think it looks great. The last thing we have to do is make a mount for the fuel rail to hold it in place. I'm gonna try to make it as simple as I can because I'm sure this video is already getting too long, but I'm thinking about just making a little mount to come up to the center of the fuel rail, drill and tap a couple holes in the bottom of the rail, and call it a day. Okay, I just finished up the rail mount, welded it on. Everything fits really nice. I'm really happy with it. This plenum has turned into kind of a Frankenstein piece, but I think it'll work out well. Everything fits really nice on the bike. Everything should clear just fine. I have to get the right size, or the right bolts for the rail mount. I had to steal them out of the shroud here, so I'll head to the hardware store and get some of those. But yeah, I'm really happy with it. So I think that's gonna do it for this video. In the next video, I'd like to get the fuel pump, regulator, fuel lines, all that kind of sorted out, but I still have to purchase all that. Except for the regulator. I have a buddy of mine let me borrow his aeromotive regulator, so that's great. But yeah, I still got to get some other parts, so it might be another few weeks before I can get to that. But I appreciate everybody watching. The support's been awesome. But this is going to do it for this video, and we'll see you in the next one.